interesting concept that regarding Imam Ali, why he did not fight for his right, which is a question many people would have. Also, there is a ring found here, so if on the brother's side, you know who has this ring, inshallah, you can contact me. And we are going to welcome Sheikh Murtaza with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Tonight we are commemorating the Shahada and the martyrdom of our first Imam, Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi afdalus salati wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And it is apt that we discuss a topic that revolves around his life. We know that Imam Ali alayhi salam was the successor to the Holy Prophet. And there are many proofs that we have for his successorship. From the hadith of Manzilat to the event of Khadir. But one of the questions that sometimes arises is that if Imam Ali alayhi salam was the successor to the Holy Prophet, then how come he didn't fight for his right? And he didn't fight for the Khilafah? As in, why did he not gather an army, raise some swords, and fight for what was rightfully his? And this is an important question, not only because it may come up as an objection in our minds, but it's an important question because sometimes it is said that the Shi'as are exaggerating the successorship of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And the fact is that the Shi'as are exaggerating the conflict between Imam Ali alayhi salam and the rulers at that time. And the matter of fact is that if Imam Ali actually thought that he was the rightful successor to the Holy Prophet, Imam Ali did not give bay'ah to Abu Bakr. Now, bay'ah is a very important thing. Bay'ah was important because when you give bay'ah to somebody, it means not only you have accepted their authority, but it means that you're going to obey them. When you gave bay'ah, it was a contract that you made. You put your hand into the hand of the other person, and it meant that I will obey you, I will support you, and I will not rise against you. And if you refuse to give bay'ah to somebody, it was taken very seriously. It's very interesting in Islamic history, none of the rulers would allow people not to give bay'ah. You didn't have a choice. Either you gave bay'ah or you were seen as a threat. there's only one person who didn't force people to give bay'ah, and that was Amirul Mu'mineen. There's a book that Aghairi Shahri has written about the political life of Amirul Mu'mineen. That book is available in English. In there, he talks about the number of people that refused to give bay'ah and allegiance to the first Imam, and he didn't force them to give bay'ah. He said, let them be. The very same people who used to say that whoever dies and he doesn't have a bay'ah on his neck, he hasn't given an allegiance to a ruler, that person has died the death of Jahiliyyah. These ahadith are there. Okay? The very same people refused to give bay'ah to Imam Ali, and he didn't force them. But otherwise, the other rulers that were there, they took it very seriously. And we don't have to go into history. You all know that when Imam Hussein refused to give bay'ah to Yazid, he saw that as a threat to his rule. And he saw that Imam Hussein was not going to obey him and possibly rise against him. Okay? So we know that Imam Ali alayhi salam did not give bay'ah. And that means that the Imam did not approve of that authority. He did not accept that authority. He did not think that that person was the rightful ruler at that time. Okay? So we make that distinction. Just because the Imam did not fight for his right, it does not mean that the Imam accepted the authority of the other person. But this brings us now to the question for tonight. Then why didn't Imam Ali fight for his right? And why didn't he fight for the Khilafah? Why couldn't he raise an army amongst the people of Quraysh, amongst the Bani Hashim, and demand for his rights? And I want to give two reasons tonight. The first reason is an ethical reason. And the second reason is a theological or doctrinal reason. So let's start with the ethical reason. We know that the role of the Imam is to protect Islam and to protect the Muslim Ummah. And if the Imams ever took leadership, it was for the purpose of protecting Islam and the Muslim Ummah. And we see in their lives that they are willing to do anything it takes to protect Islam and the Muslim Ummah. So if that means that they need to rise, then they rise, like Imam al-Hussein did. Right? And even when he was rising, he made it very clear why he's doing that. He wanted to make it clear for the people why he is revolting against Yazid. And according to one narration, he said, "Oh Allah, you know that if we have risen, then it is not for the sake of power or arrogance." I'm paraphrasing the hadith. It is not for the sake of spreading corruption in the land. If we have risen, it is for two reasons. The first one, لِنَرِدَ الْمَعَالِمَ مِنْ دِينِكَ, so we may return the teachings of your religion. وَيَأْمَنُ الْمَظْلُومُونَ مِنْ عِبَادِكَ, and so that the people who are oppressed amongst your servants, they may be granted safety and security. If that means that they have to sign a peace treaty, then they sign a peace treaty, like Imam al-Hassan did. I think one of the misconceptions that is out there sometimes that we wrongly characterize Imam al-Hassan, some people say that Imam al-Hassan was a quietist Imam, whilst Imam al-Hussein was a revolutionary Imam. And they were both revolutionaries. Imam al-Hassan was not one who chose the peace treaty. Imam al-Hassan was one who raised the army and took the army to go and fight against Muawiyah. And only when he saw that the Ummah cannot be protected anymore by fighting, that he chose to sign the peace treaty that was imposed upon him. One of the scholars in Qum, who's done research in this area, he says that in fact you shouldn't even call it the peace treaty of Imam al-Hassan. It's the peace treaty of Muawiyah that he imposed upon Imam al-Hassan. But if they had to sign the peace treaty, then they would sign the peace treaty. If the Imam had to, for example, teach people du'as, then the Imam spent his time teaching people du'as, like the fourth holy Imam. And if the Imam had to remain silent for a time and not raise arms against the ruler of the time, then they would do that. Now, when Imam Ali alayhi salam sees the situation after the Prophet of Allah passes away, he finds himself in a very difficult situation. On one hand, he finds that he has a lack of supporters, that there are not enough people who are out there willing and ready to support him. The Prophet of Allah passes away on Monday. It was a Monday when the Prophet of Allah passed away. By Monday afternoon or Monday evening, Saqifa Bani Sa'ida is happening. By Monday evening, some people have given their allegiance and bay'ah to Abu Bakr. By Tuesday afternoon at Dhuhr time, the rest of the people have also given allegiance to Abu Bakr. One thing you have to remember about that period of history is that once the leader of a qabila gave allegiance, the rest of the qabila also followed him. Okay? By Tuesday evening is when they bury the Holy Prophet. According to some narrations, Tuesday evening. According to some narrations, Wednesday morning. After they bury the Holy Prophet, now some of the Muslims gather in the masjid. Those who haven't paid their allegiance, they gather in the masjid of the Holy Prophet. And the narrator says, in one corner of the masjid was Imam Ali and the Banu Hashim were around him. And one corner of the masjid were the Bani Umayyah. Uthman ibn Affan was there and the Bani Umayyah were around him. And he mentioned some other tribes which had not given allegiance by that time. And the narrator says that Abu Bakr and Umar came into the masjid and they say to the people that everybody has paid allegiance. Then you too should pay allegiance as well. And all the remaining tribes, this is not even 48 hours. All the remaining tribes have already paid allegiance to the first Khalif, except for Imam Ali. He stands up and he leaves the masjid. But none of the other tribes of the Quraysh supported the Imam. And in fact, you find the Imam makes a point of this. He says, they failed to support me the way they failed to support the Holy Prophet. And later they fought me the way they fought against the Holy Prophet. Some of these tribes did not want the Bani Hashim to become part of the Khilafah. And some of them did not want Amir al-Mu'mineen to become the Khalif. In fact, the Imam himself complains at how few his helpers were at that time. There's a beautiful sermon called the Sermon of Shaqshaqiyya. Sometimes it's pronounced as the Sermon of Shiqshaqiyya. It's a sermon that an Imam gives during the time of his Khilafah, and it's the third sermon of Nahj al-Balagha. Now, in that sermon, he summarizes the reign of the first three Khalifs. And he describes his own situation during that time. And there's a reason why it's called the Sermon of Shiqshaqiyya. Anyways, you can read about it. It's at the end of the sermon, when the Imam is now really speaking about some important issues, and a man comes over there, and he gives some letters to the Imam and says, these letters need your response. And so the Imam stops, and he starts answering those letters. And Ibn Abbas is sitting there and he goes, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, can you continue that sermon? And the Imam says, no, it's something that came out and that's it now. And Ibn Abbas said, there's no sermon, there's no word I had heard that I wish the speaker would continue more than that particular sermon. So in that sermon, the Imam says, and I'd like to quote for you, he says, when the son of Abu Qahafa, meaning Abu Bakr, wore the garments of Khilafah, then I found myself in a difficult situation. So he says, وَطَفِقْتُ أَرْتَئِي بَيْنَ أَنْ أَصُولَ بِيَدٍ جَذَّا أَوْ أَصْبِرَ عَلَى تَخْيَةٍ عَمْيَا. My choice was either to fight with my hand cut off or to remain in sheer and absolute darkness. Subhanallah, look at the description of the situation. That either I fight against and I demand for my rights, but with my hand cut off. With my hand cut off means without any support, without anyone to help me, without people behind me. Or the other option was to accept the status quo, accept what had happened, but for me that was darkness. And later the Imam says in the same hadith, he says, فَرَأَيْتُ أَنَّ الصَّبْرَ عَلَى هَاتَ أَحْجَى فَصَبَرْتُ وَفِي الْعَيْنِ قَضَى وَفِي الْحَلْقِ شَجَى. So I saw that patience in this situation was better for the ummah. So I had patience, while it felt like in my throat was a bone and in my eye was a thorn. It wasn't an easy decision for me. It wasn't something I just overlooked like that. That today we can sit here and say, well, why didn't he fight for his rights? It was an ethical decision that he made for the sake of protecting Islam. So on one hand, the Imam sees that he has very few supporters. On the other hand, the Imam can see now that the vultures are hovering around the nascent Muslim ummah. The people of Arabia, many of them had just entered Islam. And they still remember the period of Jahiliyyah. And some of them wanted to go back to the period of Jahiliyyah. And one of the hopes that they had in their heart was that when the Prophet passes away, then Islam will also pass away with it. You know, when the ayah of Ikmaluddin is revealed, Al-Yawma akmaltu lakum dinukum, one of the main points made in that ayah, Al-Yawma ya'isa alladhina kafaru. Today, those who have disbelieved, they have lost hope that this religion of Islam would now disappear. Why? Because the rightful leadership was appointed at that time. So they were waiting for that time when the Prophet of Allah would pass away. And they were hoping at that time to make Islam go away as well. And therefore you find in history that in the first year of Abu Bakr's Khilafah, he had to fight many wars. And these wars are famously known as the Ridda Wars. And what are the Ridda Wars? The Ridda Wars are wars where some of the tribes of Arabia that had become Muslims, they turned away from Islam. And they not only turned away from Islam, but they now started to attack the Muslim community. And therefore the Muslims had to fight for a whole year, 632 to 633, to be able to unite all the tribes of Arabia. You had people like Musaylama al-Kadhab, Musaylama the liar, not only declared himself as a prophet, but he raised an army of 40,000 because he sensed there was an opportunity when the Prophet of Allah had passed away. It wasn't just Musaylama. History points out that even people like Abu Sufyan saw an opportunity. In Kitab al-Irshad, I think this narration shows you why Imam Ali is Imam Ali, why he is Amirul Mu'mineen, why he is a man of basira. Right? In Kitab al-Irshad, Sheikh al-Mufid, he says that during that time, when the Banu Hashim had not given bay'ah, Abu Sufyan came to them and he called out to them, Ya Bani Hashim, Ya Bani Abdi Manaf, O the children of Hashim, O the children of Abdu Manaf. When he's calling out like this, he's trying to remind them of the honor of their clan, the honor of their tribe. Are you really Bani Hashim? Are you really the sons of Abdu Manaf? أَرَضِيتُمْ أَنْ يَلِيَ عَلَيْكُمْ. Are you happy that so and so has become an authority over you? أَمَا وَاللَّهِ لَإِنْ شِئْتُمْ لَأَمْلَأَنَّهَا خَيْلًا وَرَجُلًا. Subhanallah. He offered and he said, if you want, I can fill the streets of Medina with soldiers and cavalry. I can fill them with foot soldiers and horsemen, and they will fight for you. Are you ready to take your rights? Now this time Amirul Mu'mineen is the leader of the Banu Hashim. How is he going to respond with regards to his right? So listen to his response now. فَنَادَاهُ أَمِيرُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ. Imam called out to him, إِرْجَعْ يَا أَبَا سُفْيَانَ. Go back, Abu Sufyan. فَوَاللَّهِ مَا تُرِيدُ اللَّهَ بِمَا تَقُولُ. By Allah, you don't wish Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with what you are saying. You are not doing this for the sake of Allah. I know you're not doing this for the sake of Allah. وَمَا زِلْتَ تَكِيدَ الْإِسْلَامِ وَأَهْلَهُ. And you have not stopped plotting against Islam and the people of Islam. I will not take your support. So imagine now, on one hand, Imam Ali sees that there are no helpers who can sincerely help him. He says in one place, he says, if I only had 40 people from the Muhajirin and the Ansar of the past, if I had 40 people from the Muhajirin and the Ansar of the past, I would have risen. He has no helpers to help him. And on the other hand, he sees that the Muslim Ummah and Islam itself, which the Prophet of Allah put so much effort into presenting it, is now going to be in danger. What do you expect an Imam to do? The Imam chooses to be patient and not to rise. The second reason, which is now a more doctrinal reason, and I'll briefly go over it, but I want to go over it because the hadith is a beautiful hadith. Okay? And this shows you now the position of imamah and what imamah actually means. Okay? And this reason is given to us by Lady Fatima. Salamullahi alayha. And it's a very profound reason. You know, brothers, I found that the very profound ideas that you find in the sermons of Amirul Mu'mineen, many of those profound ideas are actually expressed before him by Lady Fatima. So in this particular narration, there's a man by the name of Mahmud bin Labid. He says that I went to the graveyard of Uhud, where the shuhada of Uhud are buried. And when I went there, I saw that Lady Fatima was there. And she was at the grave of Sayyidu Shuhada Hamza. He was Sayyidu Shuhada at that time. And she was crying profusely at his grave. So as long as she was crying, this is after the wafat of the Holy Prophet, I did not approach her. But when her crying calmed down, then I approached her. And I said to her, Ya Sayyidati, فَمَا بَالُهُ قَدْ قَعَدَ عَنْ حَقِّهِ. I have a question for you. I want to ask you about Ali. Why is it that he did not fight for his right? And he did not rise for his right? And he sat back from demanding his right? What was the reason behind it? And the response that she gave was, Ya Aba Umar, لقد قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. The Prophet of Allah has said, now listen carefully, مثل الإمام مثل الكعبة تؤتى إذ تؤتى ولا يأتي. The example of the Imam is the example of the Kaaba. People come to it, it doesn't come to the people. In this hadith, the Imam is compared to the Kaaba. And there are many reasons for why the Imam has been compared to the Kaaba. This hadith, by the way, is not just one hadith. There are many hadith like this. In some ahadith, we're told just as looking at the Kaaba is thawab, looking at the Imam is thawab. Just as, for example, going to the Kaaba is farida, then accepting Imama is farida as well. The Kaaba is the standard, the alam, the flag of Islam. The Imam is the flag of Islam. In this hadith, we are told that just as people have to go to the Kaaba, then people have to go to the Imam. The Imam doesn't come to the people. And here you're seeing there's an important difference between Nubuwwah and Imamah, between prophethood and Imamah. The Prophet has a duty and a responsibility to go to the people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him a message. He has to convey this message to the people. And so he has to go to the people. Even the first Imam says the Prophet of Allah was like a physician traveling with his medicine. He would go from town to town. He would go from person to person. He was mab'uth. He was sent. He had to do da'wah. But the Imam is different. Because the role of the Imam is to establish justice, is to establish Islam. Therefore, people must want to establish justice, and they come to the Imam. That desire to establish justice should be within the people. They should want somebody to lead them. They must come to the Imam. You know what's beautiful about this particular hadith? It tells us about the station of Imamah. That an Imam is an Imam. People don't make him an Imam. People only make themselves followers of this Imam. And we'll end with that point that Imam Ali alayhi salam, when he had to argue against the Khawarij, he made this point to them. They would say to him that if this was truly your right, then how come you didn't fight for it? You knew this was your right, then you should have fought for it. And therefore the Imam responded by saying to them that the Prophet has said that I am like the Kaaba. The Kaaba doesn't become a kafir if people don't go towards the Kaaba. If people themselves decide that they are no longer going to do Hajj, they will become kafir. I don't stop being an Imam if people don't come to me. People themselves must decide that they want to come to me and accept me as an Imam. My Imamah is given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, the second reason was that the position of Imamah demands that people come to him, and he doesn't go to the people. We take our hearts to the city of Najaf, and this evening we call out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the sake of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Join me this evening in doing tawassul as we prepare for the night of Qadr, and we prepare our hearts to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يا أبا الحسن يا أمير المؤمنين يا علي بن أبي طالب يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا. One more time. يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا. Around the 20th day of the month of Ramadan, the 21st day, Asbagh bin Nubata says, I wanted to see Amir al-Mu'mineen one more time. I was standing outside the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen when Imam al-Hassan said to people that my father will not be seeing any guests today. We ask you to return back to your homes. But I remained over there. After a while, he said to me, O Asbagh, have you not heard what I have said? And Asbagh said, I want to see my Mawla, I want to see Amir al-Mu'mineen one more time. I want to hear something from him one more time. So Asbagh was allowed to enter into the house. He says, when I entered and I saw Amir al-Mu'mineen, I could see he was suffering from the effects of the poison. وإذا هو يرفع فخذا ويضع أخرى من شدة الضرب وكثرة السم. He would raise one thigh and then he would put it down. He was moving from side to side on account of the effect of the sword on him, the strike upon his head, and the poison that was put within it. These were the last days of Amir al-Mu'mineen. The family had gathered around Amir al-Mu'mineen. Imam al-Hassan was around him. And whenever Imam al-Hassan would cry, Amir al-Mu'mineen would console him. And Imam al-Hussein was around him. Whenever Imam al-Hussein would cry, Amir al-Mu'mineen would console him. But the narrator says that when Zainab came to him and she started to cry, even Amir al-Mu'mineen could not hold back his tears. He started to cry as well. I'll say, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, if you had only been there in Karbala on the day of Ashura, when Zainab alayha salam saw the head of Al-Hussein on a spear. The Imam does wasiyah to his children. He tells them to have taqwa. He reminds them to have taqwa. One of the narrator, he says, I was with Amir al-Mu'mineen during the last moments of his life when Lady Kulthum was seated next to him. And I say to Amir al-Mu'mineen, O Ali, may Allah grant you a complete recovery. May you recover from this. He said to me, O Habib, if you could only see what I am seeing right now, I am not going to be recovering from this. I see the angels of Allah coming down. I see the prophets of God one after another coming down. I see Rasulullah. He is next to me and he says, Oh Ali, hasten your steps towards us. For what is in front of you is better than what you are leaving behind. Imam Ali passes away on the 21st day of the month of Ramadan. They wash the body of Imam Ali. They shroud the body of Imam Ali. And they pray over the body of Imam Ali. But look at how madloom is Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is the Imam who would take care of the orphans. This is the Imam who would take care of the widow. This is the Imam who would take care of the poor. Anybody looking for justice would come to Amir al-Mu'mineen. But when he has to be buried, he is buried in the darkness of the night. His grave is kept hidden from some people. I will say, Ya Fatima Zahra, you are not the only one to be buried in the night. Look at your Ali. Even he is being buried in the darkness. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. يا حسين. يا حسين.
آسمان رنگ غربت گرفته، کوف دریای درد و علم شد. سهم دلهای عاشق از امشب کوله باریز اندوه و غم شد. یا علی یا علی یا علی جان، یا علی یا علی یا علی یا علی جان، یا علی یا علی یا علی جان. آسمان رنگ غربت گرفته، کوفه دریای درد و علم شد. سهم دلهای عاشق از امشب کوله باریز اندوه و غم شد. طاق عرش الهی فرو ریخت، قامت دین از این غصه خم شد. دیده فاطمه توی جنت از برای علی غرق نم شد. یا علی یا علی یا علی جان، یا علی یا علی، یا علی یا علی یا علی جان، یا علی یا علی یا علی جان. مسجد کوفه در خون نشسته، فرق حیدر ز کینه شکسته. گوییا پادشاه دو عالم بار رفتن از این شهر و بسته. تیغ کین تا به فرقش اثر کرد، عالمی خاک غم روی سر کرد. بشکند دست آن ظالمی که زینب و بعد از این بی پدر کرد. یا علی یا علی یا علی جان، یا علی یا علی یا علی جان، یا علی یا علی یا علی جان، یا جان. علی ای ساقی کوثر، علی مولا، علی مولا. امیر المؤمنین حیدر، علی مولا، علی مولا. علی ای ساقی کوثر، علی مولا، علی مولا. امیر المؤمنین حیدر، علی مولا، علی مولا. شب قدر و شب وصل و شب دیدار یار آمد. پس از آن بیقراری ها سحرگاه قرار آمد. ببین یا رب که به شوق تو دل خون دیده تر دارم. دگر از کوفه و این غربت خدایا عزم سفر دارم. علی ای ساقی کوثر، علی مولا. All together. امیر المؤمنین حیدر، علی مولا، علی مولا. علی ای ساقی شب پایان هجران و غم من عاقبت آمد. شب فزت و رب الکعبه گفتن عاقبت آمد. ز بعد این همه سیال آخر به پایان آمد تنهایی. خوشا آن دم که تو یا زهرا به استقبال علی آیی. سراپا شوقم و بیتابی که از تو روی تو را بینم، به شوق روی تو بردارم سر از این سجده خونینم. علی ای ساقی کوثر، علی مولا امیر المؤمنین حیدر، علی مولا one more time. علی ای ساقی کوثر، علی مولا، علی مولا امیر المؤمنین حیدر، علی مولا، علی مولا. صلی الله علی محمد و آل محمد.